FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
On the question, will sanctions work on Iran? I think it would only be sanctions plus internal change, both. I do not think sanctions alone will work. And we are in somewhat of a time contest. Do the Iranians develop a nuclear program before they get internal change? And it's a dilemma for policymakers, because if you take, for instance, military action, or if Israel takes military action, then probably the internal change for the next 10 years is over, maybe 20 years, because it will, any government gets support of its people when it's attacked. So there's a huge dilemma here for policymakers. In terms of military options, I think military options have to be on the stove. I would hope we could keep them away from the front burner as long as possible. And that means as long as we have some hope of resolving the situation, either by negotiation or by the pressure that the world is seemingly increasingly willing to put on Iran. When you start wrapping up people's bank accounts, and if we do it in a targeted way, it may help on internal change, but it has to be done carefully, because if the actions taken by the world seem to be punitive and unfair to the Iranian people, then internal change will be set back. I do not think the Iranian young people will basically be patient with the counter regime they have for many more years, but that change there will be interesting. The leader of the opposition noted the other day and criticized Ahmadinejad for allowing the sanctions to be put in place. So there is ferment in Iran. It is not one solid country that is basically bent and determined in one direction, but national pride comes into being. I remember going over to Russia since the end of the Soviet Union several times and talking to the various top officials over there about their interest in helping America put pressure on Iran and not developing Iran's nuclear weapon capability. Each time I brought it up, I saw my counterpart got out a chart and showed me all the nuclear assistance we had given to the Shah of Iran, and basically said it didn't start under Ahmadinejad. This started under the Shah, and America and Europe helped supply it. So, we don't have a perfect record on this. And when we try to get China and Russia and others to join us in putting pressure vis-a-vis North Korea, vis-a-vis Iran, we have to also say, now, if we were in their shoes, what would we do? I mean, from the Russians' point of view with the Iranians, they had their Chechnya problem. The Russians have a very large Muslim population, and they want to keep it stable, obviously. Well, they believe that the Iranians refrained from intervening when they had their Chechnya problem, and therefore they do not want to go as far as we want to go in terms of pressure on Iran. The Chinese, on the other hand, with North Korea, Russia doesn't want Iran to get nuclear weapons, I'm convinced of that. Chinese don't want North Korea to continue their nuclear program. But neither do they want them to collapse, because they see millions of refugees coming over their border. The South Koreans, our ally, feel the same way. They want to pressure, but they don't want them to collapse. So we have to put ourselves in other people's shoes and say, now what can we do if we want them to join us to ease some of their worries and to put ourselves in their shoes? And of course, that's not always easy to do, but we do need their help, there's no doubt about it. But I'm not bleak on this subject. I think it's so fundamentally in the interest of the world not to have an outbreak of nuclear proliferation and not to destroy the Non-Proliferation Treaty and its three stools that I believe, can be persuasive in working together. And I think President Obama is working this issue very hard and very diligently. A lot of it has to be done behind the scenes. The criticism is public. Sometimes the effective steps have to be done very quietly.